I want to take this section in Romans chapter 8 and talk about 3 reasons why Christians can have relentless joy. 3 reasons why Christians can have relentless joy. Or at least, in the minimum, 3 things, if you will practice, 3 things, if you will put them into practice in your life, will bring you to a place of relentless joy. And I want to put out a challenge to the dads here. At the back, I don't know how easy it is to do this, but if the light shining down on me could be just a little less hot. It's not the heat that's bothering me, it's the reflection on my glasses that is. If dads, I present this as a challenge to you, if you could take in the next 12 months and make a commitment to really speak into your kids' lives in this area, you'll be doing your kids a big, big favor. So 3 reasons Christians have relentless joy, and here they are. The first reason, bad things turn out for good. Second reason, the good things always conquer. And the third reason, the best things are yet to come. Bad things turn out for good. The good things always conquer. And the best things are yet to come. So let's go through those one at a time. First one, bad things turn out for good. We looked at this a bit a couple of weeks ago. But Romans 8, chapter 28 says, all things, we're ahead of, okay, yes, I need to establish that, thank you. So before I go to number 1, I want to talk about this. Romans chapter 8 is a chapter about suffering. Romans chapter 8 is a chapter about suffering. New American Standard Version, it says in verse 17, we're heirs of God, fellow heirs with Christ, and then there's that word if we suffer with him. Now, some people have a theology that has no place whatsoever for any suffering, and anytime any kind of suffering comes, we rebuke it because it has to be from the devil. But the truth of the matter is, if you're going to be heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, we are going to suffer with him. Verse number 18. No, let's look at that in some other versions. English Standard Version, heirs of God, fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him. New Living Translation. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. We must also. So if indeed, provided we must also share his suffering. Then moving down to verse number 18, it says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in us. The sufferings of this, that's the Bible. Now, it's not my job to polish your personal theology. It's my Bible, my job to preach the Word. And the Word says, consider the sufferings of this present time. Suffering happens in this world. As a matter of fact, verse number 22, Romans chapter 8, says, we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until all of creation, and we are part of creation, all of creation is groaning. And it sounds painful to me. I haven't had the experience, but it's compared to the pains of childbirth. This is a chapter about suffering. And it's something we need to process and think about in our own lives. So in relationship to that and relentless joy, the first thing we need to realize is that bad things turn out for good. God works all things together for good. We know that. We know that God causes all things to work together for good. You can count on that. God is going to work all things in your life. All things. Not some things, not many things, not most things. God is going to work all things together for good. Them that love God and are called according to his purposes. It doesn't say here that, hey, friend, things will work out. That's what it says. It says, Almighty Father God is working in your life, in your situation, in your sufferings, in your brokenness, in your circumstances, to see that all things get worked together for good. It's not just it'll all come out okay in the wash. God is actively involved in working all things together for good. Modern world doesn't get that. What's the modern world do? As soon as something goes wrong, run to a lawyer and figure out who to sue. Because things have got... Our worldview is that if we're in the midst of suffering, this is just an opportunity for God to show up and turn it around into something that is good and beautiful. God works all things together for good. See, there's a myth out there that says if you become a Christian, you're going to have better circumstances than non-Christians. North Americans believe it more than the rest of the world. I've been all over the world. I've been on 5 continents. And there's a lot of Christians who love Jesus with all of their hearts, who live in very squalor circumstances and situations. God doesn't promise us better circumstances. God does promise us that no matter what circumstances we are in, he is there and he is working things together for good. It's the God you serve. Janet and Scott Willis were driving down a freeway just outside of Milwaukee when all of a sudden the semi in front of them lost part of their load and they couldn't stop, and at full speed they crashed into that semi. Their gas tank exploded. And the 6 kids in their van burned to death. Mom and Dad were the only ones who got out. Randy Alcorn interviewed them 14 years later, and he asked Janet how she felt. I've written this down because I want to get it exactly what she said. Janet said, Today I have a far greater understanding of the goodness of God than I did before the accident. Scott said, 14 years later, I have a stronger view of God's sovereignty than ever before. How can you do that? 6 kids in a tragic accident. And you say 14 years later, I have a far greater understanding of the goodness of God than I did before the accident. How does that work? Well, there's an understanding that in God's kingdom, bad things turn out for the good. We don't get it. We can't comprehend it. But God never, ever lifts his hand from the circumstances and life of somebody who loves God. We need to know that. We need to understand that. And we need to be teaching it and sharing it and proclaiming it into the lives of our kids. Bad things turn out for good. Second thing we see in this portion is that good things always conquer. So how do you live in relentless joy, a joy that is independent of the circumstances and situations you're walking through? The first thing you do is you remember that bad things turn out for good. And the second thing you remember is that the good things always conquer. The good things always conquer. This portion, friends, is not talking about a bad bracket in your life where you went through a deep and dark time. This portion is talking about all things in your life. And God takes all things in your life and he works them together for good, and the good always conquers. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? But in all these things we overwhelmingly conquer through him who loved us. We'll conquer no matter what we're going through. And I want you to understand, friends, that this portion, this verse, was not written to a bunch of heathens who hated God. Paul was writing to committed Roman Christians here. Christians who knew what it was like to have tribulation and times of distress, times of persecution, and time of famine, and time of nakedness, time where the sword was thrust in front of them. And Paul says to them, and we stand on it with confidence today, many centuries later, we say, God's goodness always conquers. As a matter of fact, it overwhelmingly conquers. I picked on Nicole Martini, so I better pick on Dr. Martini for a minute. Just come help me for a second. President of the Bible College needs some stage time here. Give him a hand. Now, this, my friends, come on in, get in close. You're going down. You're going down! And I wrestle with him for 2 hours and 88 minutes. That would be 3 hours and 18 minutes. And he finally goes down. I've conquered. Okay, still don't run away that easy. But if I just go like this, and he goes down, and goes down flat, I've overwhelmingly conquered. Friends, we are, thank you, give him a hand. He normally attends Saturday. It's safer, apparently. We are overwhelming conquerors. And the good, my friends, The goodness of God always conquers. Nothing separates us from the love of Christ. Tribulation or distress or persecution or famine. So I need you to understand something this morning. Please understand that there is a likelihood that at some point in your life, some bad things might happen. And I think it's because we've embraced the theology that says, I love Jesus, so now nothing difficult is ever going to come through the front door, that we're so shocked when it does. And it's the shock of believing something that's not based on God's word that results in people losing their faith. Bad things happen to good Christians. But you need to understand, when the bad things come, you're going to conquer. And don't get all tripped up and messed up by them. It's just an opportunity for God to get involved and work things together for good and to conquer. Not saying that what some will say, that Christians don't have bad moments, because I've spent too much time in the Word to be able to believe that, and I've pastored too many situations to believe that. Try to tell a Christian whose leg just snapped in half and he's going to be off of work for 6 months that that's a good thing. It's a bad thing. God will work it together for good, but it's not a good thing, and you'll sound awful silly trying to tell him it is. Years ago, I received a phone call from a guy I had just married them 18 months before, maybe 2 years. And he said, my wife died today. I'd heard the explosion they lived about 3 blocks from us. She turned on the stove in their kitchen, and there was a natural gas buildup in the house, and when she turned on the stove, the house went into complete flames. She died in the flames. Somehow, miraculously, their little baby was pushed outside the kitchen window and survived. Can't tell me when he's sitting in my living room and tears are rolling down his cheeks that I should be telling him that's a good thing. Bad things happen to Christians. But when bad things happen, God hasn't left us. And God hasn't deserted us. Romans chapter 8 and verse number 15. Whatever verse will come up now. Romans chapter 8 and verse 35, sorry. Okay, we're going somewhere. Bad things turn out for good. Good things. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? None of those things. Now to Romans 8. Verses 28 and 29. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So that's what I call a promise box blessing. Any of you have promise boxes? A couple of you. My wife was raised on promise boxes. As a matter of fact, we have a promise box in our house because she was raised on a promise box. And a promise box is just a collection of promising scriptures, and when you're wake up in the morning, you're going through a discouraging time, you take one of the promises and you read them. This is a promise box blessing verse. But unfortunately, it's taken out of context a lot. I didn't get accepted in the grad school I wanted to get accepted in, so I just know God's got another school for me. I fell in love with that girl and asked her to marry me, and she said no, but so I just know God's got a better girl for me. And she'll be better looking too. But that's not what God's talking about here when he says God works all things together for good. There's a word there, for, in the next verse. And if you take it out of context, you're going to end up with really wacky theology. For those God foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And God's purpose in all of this is to conform us, make us into the image of his Son. And God hasn't thrown this word predestined in there in this particular portion so we can have great big theological debates. God has put that word in there for us to find comfort in it. God has predestined every one of us to get looking more and more like Jesus and to have a spiritual transformation going on inside of us. It's actually talking about the very essence of God becoming part of us. God polishes us and shines us, and God takes away the sharp edges of life as we go through life, making us into something transformed and something beautiful. So what have we picked up here in this journey towards relentless joy? First of all, bad things turn out for good. Number 2, good things always conquer. And number 3, the best things are yet to come. The best things are yet to come. Romans chapter 8 and verse number 30, whom he predestined, he also called. Whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. God has predestined us for his glory. God has predestined us to take on the very character and the very nature of God. And nothing can separate you from God's plan and purposes in that direction. Nothing in this world. Only one thing can separate you from God's plans and purposes in your life in this area. And that thing that can separate you is hardness of heart and stubbornness of spirit and a lack of a commitment to believe in God's best for you. If you're going to be stubborn and unrepentant and have a hard heart, God will let you go that direction. But if you love him, God is going to be busy in your life, and the best things are yet to come. Read verse 18 of chapter 8. I started there. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that's to be revealed in us. A lot of us, and I shouldn't speak for all of you because it would make me feel guilty. I've been pastoring many of you too long. So a lot of people in other places have a concept that Christianity is all about having wonderful experiences. Dancing at the altar, tears rolling down their cheeks in joy. But that's not God's ultimate intention or purpose for us. His ultimate intention and purpose for us is not to have good times at the altar. His ultimate intention and purpose for us is to be made conformed into the image of God, where we will enjoy God forever in eternity. We are going to be glorified. And so Paul says, consider that. Friends, this is a thinking man's religion. This is a thinking man's religion. We have to consider that. We have to think about it. thinking and loving God go together. And you need to consider the reality that the sufferings of this present time are not to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed in you. Think about that. Consider it. Don't throw this message out. Consider it. Think about it. Now, when you look at a verse like Romans 8, verse 18, you should go to 2 Corinthians and see what Paul has to say there in verse 17. Our momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. So, what's happening in your life? There are some times of affliction. There are some times of difficulty. There are some times of trouble. There are some times of brokenness. But what is God doing? Two interesting words here. He takes that light affliction and he does a heavy work in you. He takes that light affliction and he does a heavy work in you. A work that produces a weight of glory for you as you move into the next life. There's a verse we all quote. We read it at funeral services. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you so. I go and prepare a place for you. And that's true. God is preparing. If you're a believer, God is preparing a place for you. But what we don't emphasize enough is that not only is God preparing a place for you, God is preparing you for that place. That was an important line. In case you missed it. God is not just preparing a place for you. God is also preparing you for that place. And in that place, we are going to rule and reign with him for eternity. And here's what God knows. God knows that if he's going to give any of us authority to rule and reign, we better have all agendas out of our heart. We need to have all selfishness out of our heart. We need to have everything out of our heart that is stubborn. There's no place for sin in somebody who's going to be ruling for eternity. So God is chipping away at those things. Because it's not just about you going to a place. It's about you being ready to get there. Be there. I'm old enough now that I look back a lot. And in grades 5 and 6, my dad was pastoring in Southeast Calgary, pioneering a church in a part of the city that didn't want an evangelical church and especially did not want any holy rollers around. That's what we were called 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And parents were talking about the holy roller guy coming to start a church, and it became part of the talk at the school. And for most of grade 5 and most of grade 6, on the way to school, I was met by a group of guys who beat me up almost every single day. I didn't like that. That wasn't a good thing. It wasn't fun. But now, many years later, I look back and I say, man, that was a good thing. Because it built some kind of character and tenacity in me where I don't lose sleep over anything. People can disagree with me. They can tell me I'm stupid. They can tell me I'm a terrible pastor. They can tell me I'm a great pastor. I don't stay up at night rejoicing in the compliment, and I don't let the difficult times keep. But I'm not sure I'd be there if I didn't have those 2 years as reference point in my spirit, where I knew I came through it and I'm still around. God takes things, light afflictions, and he prepares us and makes us less stubborn, less self-centered, less offended, and more saying, Lord, it's all about you, it's all about you, it's all about you. So here's the 3 things that'll take us to relentless joy. We need to know that bad things turn out for good. We need to know that good things always conquer. And we need to know that the best things are yet to come. So Janet Willis was asked, there's their picture now, 14 years after that tragic accident. Scott's face was badly burned. God's done a good work in bringing healing to that. Janet was asked, how would you respond to those who say, no good could possibly be worth your suffering and the loss of your children all these years? And this is her answer. Eternity is a long time. It will be worth it. Our children's suffering was brief, and they have the eternal joy of being with God. We and their grandparents have suffered, but it is small compared to our children's joy. 14 years is a short time. We will be with him forever. This is not all there is, friends. This is not all there is. The earth groans and the earth suffers. There's seasons of difficulty and challenges for all of us. I'm hopping in my truck this afternoon and driving to go get Dawn and bring her home. Enough of this. But by the end of the day, I'll be standing beside the bed of my father-in-law, who's been an inspiration in my life and nothing but an encouragement. A godly man. A guy who spent most of his life getting up at 4 a.m. to pray. Godly guy. But the end draws near. And is it easy to say goodbye to Dad? No, it's a hard time. But in the end, for him, there's an exceeding weight of glory. The light affliction of leaving this earth is nothing compared to what Dad is going to enjoy forever and ever and ever and ever. For Christians, the best is yet to come. Let's stand.